Hello, welcome to Dark Histories. I'm Sarah Lee,
And I'm Josh.
and today we're talking about the case of Fred and Rose West, the famous bodies in the garden case from Gloucestershire in England in 1994.
Cool. The 90s. I love the 90s. Heck yeah, 90s. It was great. You think about it, everything was gross back then. Like boogers and stuff were funny, and.
Fred West's garden was gross.
Was he?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
he
So
had
how?
three bodies under there.
Oh wow. Okay. Cool. So 3 bodies under where? Ha ha! You got me to say it. All right, go on.
Oh my god. In 1994,
hmm
police came to search Fred and Rose's garden with a warrant because the children that had been taken into care a while earlier kept joking about how their dad would say that if they got in trouble, they'd bury them under the patio with Heather, who was their sister.
Oh, okay.
And Heather had disappeared a few years earlier. There was absolutely no trace of her. Police had been trying to find her. And yeah, they went with a warrant to dig up the garden. They found Heather, but while they were digging for Heather, they also found a third femur.
A third femur.
Yes.
So, a literal tripod, or you think that there was another?
Well, the joke was unless Heather had 3 legs,
Yeah.
there was another body. And then Fred basically confessed and said, there's more. Like, how much more? And he was like, his exact words were, there's a fucking load more.
Oh, wow. Quotations. Big quotations, right?
Yes.
All right. So when you say garden, hold on a second. When you say garden, obviously, being American, I think, okay, cool, tomatoes, friggin', there's a couple squash, zucchini plants, corn.
No, it was just a little area really at the back where the children would play. And as I said, he built a patio.
All right, so it's what we would call a backyard.
Yeah.
All right, so burying your family members under your backyard. That's nice. And you said under the patio, right?
Yes.
All right, cool. Well,
Yes.
I tried to pull a Jimmy Hoffa.
Yes. So, yeah, he confessed. He actually pointed out to the detectives where they would find the bodies. I believe there were 6 in the house. There was 1
6
under a bathroom. There was 5 under the basement where the children's room used to be, where the children used to sleep. And there was 3 in the back garden.
All right, cool. So a bunch of fertilizer.
But
That's
obviously,
awful, but go on.
what I want to do today, because Rose has always maintained her innocence, always. So I'd like to look at those 2 personally, because the stories are just insane. I mean, I know that it's bad enough that you find, 9 bodies in a house.
It's bad enough you find 1 body in a house.
And then they led to other bodies, obviously, that weren't in the house. There was Fred's ex-wife. Actually, they didn't find Fred's ex-wife's body, but he's confessed to her murder. He killed her in 1967. He buried her in a field, apparently close to where he buried Anne McFall, who was his girlfriend that was pregnant, that he was cheating on this wife with.
All right.
And he buried her. They found her body, and she had her fingers and toes missing.
So they found the girlfriend, but couldn't find the ex-wife. Did he not remember where it was exactly, or was it?
It was a really big field sort of thing, and obviously over time, stuff happens to the ground, and
there's distortion and all that.
So he pointed out where
Erosion.
he thought it was, but yeah, they just couldn't find it.
Okay.
And then there was Fred's. Well, it wasn't Fred's daughter actually. It was Catherine, his ex-wife's daughter.
Okay.
By another man, but they'd told Fred's parents and everyone that it was Fred's daughter, which was quite amusing because she was quite obviously Asian, very dark-skinned. And they found her body under the basement of a house that Fred and Rose lived in when they were first married.
Okay.
And Rose eventually got convicted based on that, because when they identified Charmaine's remains through dental records and photographs of her at that time, it was quite cool how they did it. They showed you how they did it on a documentary, and they had the actual skull, and they did an x-ray of the skull. They put that up on a computer, and then they slid the photographs across to see if it matched up,
Matched. Okay.
and that's how they identified Charmaine.
So old school dental records.
Yeah, but it was found that she would have died while Fred was actually in prison.
Oh.
So
Okay. So
Rose's version of events, Fred did all this, I had no idea, and this poor wife that was clueless goes kind of out the window at that point.
Okay. So she would have been, or he would have been in prison. I mean, maintain your innocence all you want. Obviously, the prison system is made up of innocent people. You know?
Yeah, but if you're in prison, you haven't done it. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so it was quite obvious that she'd done that.
All right. So based on what, just dental records and decay, they put it around when he would have been in prison. Now, how long was he in prison?
At that point, I'm not sure. It was quite a short sentence. I think it was under a year.
Okay.
It was for petty theft, I think. He'd been in prison a couple of times.
Okay, so he was habitual.
Yeah. He reminds me, I've said this to you before, and I actually find it hilarious. That it sounds quite bad, but he reminds me of my dad in so many ways.
So crazy serial killer kind of.
It was that it's the way he talks and the way he does things. Like he was a handyman sort of all his life and a builder, and he just did random jobs for random people who'd pay him in cash.
It's a respectable profession.
Yeah, but he'd like steal from everywhere that he was working, and he was just really scruffy and lied a lot, and these lies that he told weren't even believable lies. Like you listen to some interviews with him with the police, and some of the stories he comes up with are just so far out there.
Okay.
Like apparently Heather was working for a drugs cartel and stuff, and it was all just so.
And it then somehow ended up under the front porch.
Under the back patio.
Yeah, well, I guess if you. Yeah. Okay. Go on.
And I'm gonna start with his upbringing, seeing as though we're on him, because it's wrong on so many levels, but in this case you can see where a lot of things come from. So Fred was born on a farm in a little place called Muchmarkel, which is a cute little village sort of thing that's even now is very backwards, I believe. And he lived on a farm with his mum Daisy and his dad Walter, and I believe he was his mum's favourite. He had like really big blue eyes, and he was actually classed as quite attractive when he was younger.
Okay.
He was really sort of cheeky and charming. Like that's what I meant to say when I was talking about how he talks. He creates these massive stories that are unbelievable, but he can just charm his way out of anything.
Silver tongue. Okay.
Completely. And yeah, he'd help out on the farm and stuff. I believe there was mention of him having sex with pigs.
Okay.
And other farm animals. His dad had basically taught him that if there was a place to put it and you could get away with it, you do it.
Okay.
I know there was sexual abuse from the mother, as is normally, in serial.
In what way? I mean, I hate to ask, but I know
I'm
that
not
it's
sure
not
exactly, because obviously things don't go into extreme detail with these things, but I know that there was a sexual relationship between him and his mother.
Okay.
And as far as I know, it seems that his younger brother, who will be involved in this a little bit later,
don't tell me it's actually thought to be his.
John, I believe his name is, yes, John. I believe he was quite jealous of the sexual relationship between Fred and his mother. His mother was a very strong sort of matriarchal type.
Okay.
Like very scary. There was an incident where Fred raped his 13-year-old sister.
Okay.
And she'd gone to the police, I believe. Or she told someone in authority. And Fred didn't get in trouble. His parents defended him the whole way. The little girl ended up getting in trouble from the parents, because what happens in your family, you keep it there.
Yeah.
If Fred wants to rape you, you let him do it.
All right.
That sort of thing. So
charming.
Obviously, from being very young, there's no boundaries. Sex is a very big thing. It's everywhere. It's just normal. You just
do it.
Yeah. I know he got in trouble a few times for like molesting young girls and stuff, but he never actually got in trouble. Like there was never actually any punishment.
Mm.
So you see this pattern of you can get away with anything.
Yeah.
And then he had a motorbike accident, I believe. He was about 16-ish.
Right.
He came off his bike and he injured his head, the prefrontal cortex, as I talked about before. A lot of serial killers end up having these head injuries that damage this prefrontal cortex, which is basically your body's sort of thing that stops you from doing things. So if you have like, everyone thinks about doing crazy things now and then, but you have this part of your brain that says, no, you don't do that. That's not right. We're not going to act on that. And that's your prefrontal cortex. So that was damaged, and apparently as soon as that happened, his whole family noticed a change in him. He's just bad attitude.
Well, head trauma will do that.
Sort of, yeah. But like I said, you can see pretty much what was happening there. And then he got married to Catherine, who was a prostitute from Scotland, had somehow ended up in Gloucester. Or Gloucestershire. I can never remember which one. I think it's Gloucester.
All right. Anyway, she's a prostitute.
Yeah, and then she got pregnant with, I can't remember if it was a bus driver. I think it was a bus driver, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It was a bus driver's baby, and that was the Asian baby, Charmaine, who they would take back to Fred's parents and say it was Fred's child, and no one even blinked.
All right. So me, myself, and Irene thing going on.
Yes, and then she then did get pregnant with a baby that was Fred's.
Okay.
So Anne-Marie was then born. There'd be a lot of trouble between those two, Catherine and Fred, and she'd go back to Scotland all the time. He was always with the children, basically, is what I'm going to say. No matter what happened, he ended up with the children. Her friend Anne McFall ended up staying with them in a caravan they lived in. An affair started. She got pregnant and she disappeared. Yeah. And then obviously Fred met Rose. And I'll go back to Rose's upbringing because you can see that from all this, the chances of these two people meeting and having a relationship is just probably 1,000,000 to 1 because they're both probably the most messed up people in the country. And so Rose was born in Devon. Her mum was extremely depressed when she was pregnant, and they gave her electric shock therapy
while she was
pregnant, which apparently was still a
they
thing.
They were born in the 50s.
She was born in 1953.
Yeah, she was born in 53. So, I mean, hell, we didn't even know half the things that are bad for us at that point. So, an electroshock therapy, I'm not 100% certain, but that didn't stop until I don't even know if it still stopped.
I'm not sure when it stopped. It has stopped.
Oh, okay, cool.
I'm not sure when it stopped, but yeah, it was more recently than not. And then obviously because of the electroshock therapy, the baby came out. The baby was very slow. They were quite worried about Rose.
Yeah.
She would repeatedly bang her head on things. Like just constantly. And they couldn't get her to stop.
That's actually a sign of social retardation.
Yeah, well, she obviously wasn't all there. I mean, even when you see her now and, even when you saw her in court, you can tell there's something not right there. Her dad had been a soldier, I believe, and he got injured. He came back. He couldn't work. He couldn't be a soldier again.
From what I understand, he was, a very charming man as well. But, when you got into the home, it was a total flip switch kind of situation where it was incredibly violent.
The home would have looked brilliant to people. He was extremely OCD. Like everything had to be absolutely spotless all the time, which I believe probably led to Daisy's depression because she was constantly trying to keep up with his demands.
Yeah.
And yeah, he would be very violent towards her and the children. I think it's been described as Rose grew up and learnt very quickly that the way to curb her dad's anger was to, you know, be sexual with him.
Oh, okay.
So there was a sexual relationship there from a very young age, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, other than that, I mean, there's no major events. Well, you'd say, oh, that was major enough.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
Yeah, but obviously she wasn't a very well sort of adjusted child.
Well,
And they moved to Gloucester, I believe, when Rose was 15, and she was working in a cafe. And Fred came in. Obviously, he's very charming, and even though he's quite a lot older than her. And yes, she began dating Fred. The dad found out and put her into a children's home.
At 15?
Yes, to get her away from Fred.
How do you do that at 15? I mean, at that point, I know you can
See, I'm a bit.
but Lord, 15? Children's home?
It's quite strange to me as I read about a lot of this. I mean, I've read about this over and over again for years, but I think it seems that at that time you could just call a children's home and be like, look, I don't want my kid.
That's ridiculous. Could you imagine with Summer just saying, all right, we're going to put you up for adoption? Could you imagine? That's ridiculous.
Like, oh, you're annoying us this week. You're going into care for a week.
Yes.
But obviously the children's home can only keep you until you're 16, and then you can do what you want.
Oh, so it's until 16.
I think it sort of depends on. I don't think it is now, but it was then. And obviously she moved straight out, moved in with Fred, and got pregnant, and that was that.
Yeah. Isn't that how it goes? I don't know. I mean, yeah, okay. So we're seeing a lot of childhood sexuality. I know that it's. I mean, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of.
Yes, I mean that would then carry on as Fred and Rose obviously had more children. Fred would always say, he was the first one to have sex with all his daughters, and well, he had to be. He would talk to them about that from being very young. Be like, look, when you get to this age, I'm going to have sex with you because you're my daughters, you're my property, and I've got to be the first one to do that sort of thing. The older children, there was, at this time they were in the property where Charmaine died. There was Charmaine, Anne-Marie, and then Rose would give birth to Heather there. Then they would move to 25 Cromwell Street, which is the famous house, the House of Horrors, where they'd taken lodgers to keep up affording the place. A few of the girls that were found murdered were their previous lodgers, and they've all got interesting stories themselves. There's one that was pregnant with Fred's child when she was murdered, and the body was found with the child out of the womb, like next to the body. And there's a police interview where I believe, it's claimed that when he was talking to his appropriate adult, because he had learning difficulties or whatever, he would say, he'd be shocked when they said that. It's like, oh, Rose must have done that. So
on the other side,
it's all, like I said, there's a lot of information. It's hard to do this in a timeline because things just come up. There's so much. So they moved to 25 Cromwell Street. They had 3 children at that point, and then Rose would get pregnant again. And I can't remember which way this goes. I think it was Stephen then May. Could have been the other way around, but I think it was Stephen then May. And they were the children that would be old enough and sort of remember a lot of things. Obviously, Heather was the one that was buried under the patio. It's believed that she would refuse her father's advances a few too many times, and he got angry with her and killed her. I will also state that all the bodies were dismembered. There's actually an interview clip with Fred describing how he chose which knife to use and things. And it's quite chilling to listen to. So yeah, he murdered his daughter, cut her body up, and buried it in the back garden, and then built a patio over it. But yeah, those three children would write books. So Anne Marie wrote a book. Anne Marie, I think, got hit the hardest because she wasn't Rose's child. And it becomes very apparent when you read things written by Anne Marie just how violent Rose was. She wasn't, I mean, obviously she was a mother and she loved her children, but it would be said that she loved the babies. As they grew up, she didn't have time for them. She was very aggressive, very violent. But yeah, it seems that Rose abused Anne Marie from a very young age, both sexually and physically, and she would have a really, really hard time of it. Rose was working as a prostitute in that house. They had a room set up upstairs with a little peephole for Fred. Fred would record everything that went on in that room. It was all very, very strange.
Okay.
And I believe Anne Marie was sold as well, and she was about 13-ish. Wow. So obviously, as soon as she could get out of the house, she got out of the house. She moved out when she was 16.
Yeah.
Which is obviously before they were caught and all of this came to light. But yeah, it does sound like it was horrendous enough. And obviously she was too scared to tell authorities. So May also went through quite a lot. I wouldn't say as much as Anne Marie. I think she got off quite lightly. Stephen, I believe there was an incident. I think Rose was the most violent to Stephen. There was an incident where she tied him up or something for hours and beat him. Oh, something very, very tedious. But yeah, they all knew that he never talks about anything that happened in the house, outside the house. You know, I do feel really bad for them because they've got to live with all this now.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not sure where to go from here.
Well, okay, so their upbringing was transferred into their own children's lives.
Yeah.
You know, well, I had to have sex with my parents, so you're going to have sex with yours.
Though I will say, after reading both Anne Marie and Mae West's book, they've grown up very well. Like, considering everything that's happened, they've got good lives. They're very, reading the books, they seem like very rational, logical people. So I do find some comfort in that. That's
good. I mean, you know, it's not something I could imagine putting myself into or anybody else.
Exactly. It's beyond belief, really. It's one of those things that you hear about, and it's all like tons of gossip, and everyone's like, oh, did you hear this? But really, when you think about it properly, you can't imagine that happening. You can't imagine putting your child through that.
Well, you know, most of the time that I hear about all of this, it focuses on the devil that Rose was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they do talk about Fred, obviously. I mean, you know, you can't have one without the other. But it's the same thing with Moore's murders.
Mm-hmm.
The most hated person in the whole situation is the woman, because, I mean, as a woman yourself, you couldn't imagine, you know, having anything less than unconditional, holy crap, love for your child. And here this is. So it's
or someone else's child. You could, as a woman, you could never hurt a child.
Of course not. You know,
that's the thing. And it's quite interesting that you bring up the Moore's murders, because I believe that has the same sort of, I think they call it folie à deux.
Is that French?
Yes, it's a French term in criminal psychology that describes two people that meet, and just the circumstances of them two meeting and those personalities being together just creates this absolute monster.
Okay.
You know, just this clash of damaged people, really.
All right. Well, I mean, it makes sense. You know, personalities build off of each other, and sometimes personalities are terrifying together.
Because if you look at, I mean, we'll do the Moore's murders another time, but if you look at those, I'm not sure. No, I think it's probably the same. If you look at Fred and Rose and Myra and Ian, if those people hadn't met, I don't think the women would have killed anyone.
You don't think so?
No.
Well, I mean, you know, huge Batman fan. And not the new Harley Quinn, but no, I'm a fan of the original.
Yeah.
But you know, kind of the same deal. Was it? What do you think? You know, the Joker's absolutely nuts, and then
Yeah.
somehow she becomes absolutely nuts, and it's obvious because Harley Quinn was like, "Oh, I'm your counselor," and then she falls in love with him, and
Yeah.
then they kind of just build off of each
It
other
is
into a
one of
one
those, like,
kingpin
Fred had
kind
a
of world.
very intense personality, and
Oh yeah,
it's the same with Ian. Like I said, we'll come to that. Ian Brady is probably one of the most intense people I've ever researched.
Hmm.
So it's easy to see how these women could, especially with Rose being a bit slow, she probably wanted a lot of acceptance. So she would have followed on with a lot of things that Fred did.
Yeah.
And you'll find a lot of these women that were found were taken from bus stops. And what they believe would happen is Fred and Rose would drive past a bus stop, they'd
Okay.
stop, and Rose would offer the lady a lift.
Uh-huh.
Because you're more likely to get into a car with a woman.
Well, yeah. I mean, you feel more comfortable with a woman because
There's actually a surviving victim called Caroline Roberts.
Is it Caroline or Carolyn?
It's Caroline.
Oh, okay.
Caroline Roberts, who had moved in with the Wests and was their nanny for a while, and had moved out after Fred had made some advances, and they'd seen her walking somewhere. Drove by, Rose offered her a lift, she got in, and then she would say that it was Rose that initiated the violence, the abuse. She'd be taken to the house, tied up, taped up,
Oh,
all
wow.
manner of sexual things happening. So apparently Rose was in control that whole time. She said Fred did rape her once while Rose wasn't in the room, and he begged her not to say anything to Rose.
Oh, okay.
And I believe that's how she ended up being let go.
Okay. You know what? That probably stems with, you know, the matriarch of his family, the sexual reality between there, because, he saw that she was in charge, transfer that unto,
Well, I
his now
think
wife, where, she is officially the matriarch of his life, probably takes after him or her control very well. It only makes sense. I mean, well, naturally, the joke would be, oh, don't tell my wife, because, a guy does all sorts of things.
yeah, it was
Don't tell
clearly
my
not a
wife.
joke. It was.
I mean, you could have one too many beers. Don't tell my wife. It's not funny, but it it only makes sense.
Now, I know this lady never went to the police because she was terrified and she didn't think anyone would believe her. Which at this time, it is kind of sad, but at that time, I probably agree with her. I mean, there was apparently another lady that had been picked up by them and had gone to the police.
Yeah.
And I can't remember that. I think that's when the younger children, I didn't mention earlier, after Fred and Rose had been living in this place a while and she'd been a prostitute, they became obsessed with getting Rose pregnant with a black child. Because a lot of her clients or punters or whatever they call them were black guys. So they do stuff like save the condoms and try and insert the semen into Rose.
Oh, that's a very old practice.
Things like that. Apparently, they had jars in the room as well, and each man that she slept with had his own jar, and she put her knickers in there that she'd worn afterwards and stuff. It's all very strange. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense.
Oh wow, that's just nasty.
So yeah, she did end up having, I think, 3 children that were from clients and not Fred's, and then she did have another child that was Fred's. But these children were all very young. There's not a lot, as they shouldn't be. There's not details out there. There is about one of the children, but I'm not going to put it out there because I'm not that person.
Okay.
They've probably got enough stigma from all this. They don't need their names or anything out there. So they were taken into care at this point, I think, and that's when they'd make the joke about Heather being under the patio, and police start looking into Heather and being like, oh, actually, no one's seen her for 2-3 years. I mean, how that happens, I don't know. How the school system didn't go to the police,
I
or
can't imagine the school system was
it
that great back then.
absolutely blows my mind that there's so many chances in this case for someone to do something and no one ever does anything. Like, they get away with everything all the time. I think they would have been put in jail at that point, but Anne Marie had refused to testify about the sexual abuse. She decided to, but then she changed her mind, which is understandable because it is scary. She was a child. She probably thinks that the wrath of Rose is scarier than anything in the world. So
yeah, no, I can get that.
It's sad.
Well, excuse me, goodness. Yeah, it's like I said, don't tell my wife kind of crap all the time, but yeah, he probably just looks at her like he looks at his mom. I ain't no telling what she was thinking.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting case of, and this is one of my favorite stories of all time, but The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
So we're not talking about the movie.
No,
Okay, good.
we're talking about the written story.
I gotcha. No,
So-
I'm sorry. Just like, what are they doing?
In the case that Fred would have, when Fred and Rose met, Rose would have been the vulnerable one that Fred was teaching things to.
Yeah.
And as time went on, the teacher becomes the master, sort of thing. No,
Right.
the student becomes the master, sort of thing. So then Rose goes even further and gets even more violent, and then it's her.
Yeah. So.
And Fred's like, "Oh my God, what have I
created?
done?"
Yeah. Well, usually the one who starts it has a line, and they won't cross that line, but they'll bring you to it. And then it always ends up being the other one that says, you know what, screw it, let's go. We've been here, we've done this, I'm going to push further. And if that's what happened, that's what happened.
And they said they found 9 bodies in the house altogether. But there's these crimes span like 17 years, 18 years.
Yeah.
But then there's a hell of a long time before and after all of these murders that is completely unaccounted for. And serial killers don't just stop. They normally don't stop until they're caught.
Yeah. They get really cocky
It's very rare for a serial killer just to stop, especially when it's 2 people that have 9 people buried under their house.
Yeah.
Fred has made statements to people saying that he's got hundreds of bodies under the paving stones of Gloucester, which, given his trade, is entirely possible.
Yeah, couldn't be that hard to do.
And quite scary.
That's true. Where's he now?
Fred hung himself.
Oh, okay.
Let's get to this. What happened was he got arrested, obviously, straight away in 1994. Rose would eventually get arrested after they bugged a safe house she was staying in and a few other things. And I think they'd done the Charmaine link by then, so she got arrested. And he would write to her and she'd ignore him. And apparently they had a walk in a park the day before Fred handed himself in and said, "Look, just take me." And they'd made some sort of pact. And Fred would mention this and Rose would ignore him. And then they would go to the courtroom to enter a plea. And she'd completely just shun him. And then on New Year, he hung himself in his cell, wrote a note saying, "I'll always love you, Rose."
Okay. Yeah, like I said,
luckily for the police, Fred had give them that much information, even without knowing that he did, because of just how he talks. And
yeah, sometimes you talk too much.
They managed to get a conviction, and Rose finally got convicted of 10 murders. I think that was largely thanks to Caroline Roberts, who was extremely brave for going to the trial and reporting all that. So she would be found guilty for 10 murders, given a life sentence.
So, Fred,
Mhm.
Was he ever actually convicted, or did he just?
No.
Okay, so he just killed him or hung himself inside his
Mhm.
cell after writing the note. You got Rose. I know she's still alive.
Yes, she is still alive. Yeah,
Yes.
she's just been moved from a prison up the road from here, actually. Well, to a prison up the road from here. Apparently, she sits in a cell. She orders things from Argos. She has a very nice time. She's kept under very heavy security, obviously, because it's Rose.
That's
She's so
interesting how that
infamous.
works, isn't it?
She would have been up for parole, I think, a few years ago, but she's always said that she's just not interested. She likes her life in jail.
Well, yeah, you would. I mean, if you're
She
given,
gets everything she wants. She just sits in a room and
yeah,
I know that she had budgies at one point.
budgies.
Yeah, she had some pet budgies in jail.
What's a budgie?
A little birdie.
Oh, I don't know birds.
Yeah, no, just a little colourful pet birdie you get.
Mm.
And her daughter May would write about this budgie in her book and how this mother that she was there trying desperately to believe hadn't done these things would care more about the budgie than her. She wasn't interested in her. All she wanted from her was money sent in so she could buy stuff.
Yeah, that's weird.
And this budgie got all her love and attention, and just very, very, very twisted people.
I'm sorry. On a side note, that's strange. I mean, I understand that she's high profile and in a prison with that kind of crime.
I have my
You know,
opinions.
but the idea of giving these people such a elevated living,
Yeah,
that is ridiculous.
I have my opinions.
Oh, I'm sure we all do.
And my opinions are, as an accountant, very much based on the fact that I'm not happy for my taxes to be paying for her to be living it up in prison.
Mm.
I'm just not. I'm okay with my taxes giving her the 3 meals a day to survive and, a nasty cell to sleep in.
Mm.
That's about it. I can make my peace with that.
That's so weird.
I mean, they brought out a thing at one point saying that how many millions had been spent of taxpayers' money just in her security and things over the years. I am not okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. She doesn't need to be with, general population.
No.
But she doesn't need to have a tennis court.
Yeah, well, I don't think she has a tennis court.
Well, it's an example, an exaggeration for sure, but.
And we'll get to a similar thing with Myra Hindley when we do that case. I think we'll probably do that in the next few weeks, because it is a very interesting case, one that's very local to me. But yeah, she also had there was things about one of the prison wardens taking her out for walks, like took her out of the prison one day for a walk. What are you doing?
I don't know. I can't understand how any of that works. I mean, 25 years or life or whatever the heck she's got. Just let her rot.
That's what I mean.
I mean, personally, if I knew I was getting more than one consecutive life sentence, just shoot me in the head. I'm not gonna sit around here and live out my days in a bird cage.
I will mention, because I mention with everything, probably to end this with, that there's the nature versus nurture argument. In this case, I think it shows how strongly nurture does affect people. People who, I know that a lot of people go through sexual abuse, a lot of people go through physical abuse, and they don't become serial killers. But I think you can see, like, it's so obvious looking at their backgrounds and then the meeting, and there's not a second where you sit there thinking, oh, well, I can't explain how they're a bit.
Yeah.
Like, it's all just crazy. And I'm just, like I said, I'll end on the fact that after reading both the daughters' books, they're amazing people, especially given what they've gone through.
Mm. Amazing people.
They really are. They seem very strong women, very logical, very rational.
Yeah.
just, you know, trying to deal with what they've been through piece by piece and build a life for their children.
One thing that I've seen in life is that some of the people that have been abused the absolute most, the most respectable ones, of course, and nobody needs to be abused. That
Hmm.
should go without saying. But they spend so much of their life going to like psychology, learning about psychology, going to psychiatrists, and trying to make sense of what happened. That it is a logical thing in their own mind, but
Hmm.
in truth, it's the only word that I could think to use would be a mix between traumatic and,
Oh, of course,
well,
you have to relive the trauma in that case, but
yeah,
I don't think they did it like that. I think in their case, it's a matter of, well, they did. They went through the trauma again, and then they managed to, you know, go get to the acceptance stage, put it behind them. They seem to be doing great.
mm,
So I'm just happy for them out of everyone. You know, obviously none of the women that died deserved any of it, and just,
of course not.
let's just hope we're not living next door to a Fred and Rose West.
Yeah, let's hope.